Okay, looks like we're live. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to this Friday episode of Crypto with Chris. Today we're going to dig into some TA. It's going to just be me solo today. Probably go for, I don't know, 20 or 30 minutes, and we'll see how it goes. I kind of want to break down the Bitcoin cycles from that standpoint for a little bit. Look at it on a couple different time frames. Then I want to look at both Bitcoin and Ethereum, different support resistance levels, also on a few different time frames. Then I kind of want to go through some alt BTC charts and sort of look at that and look at things are in terms of where we are versus, in terms of alt season, Bitcoin season, things like that. And so, yeah, I guess, but before that, I just wanted to, again, remind everybody to follow my channel, particularly if you want to comment, you need to be a follower in order to be able to comment in the stream. And then also follow me on my Telegram for any kind of announcements for any shows I'm doing, whether it's on Twitch or Real Vision or anything like that. The link to my Telegram is both in the description for my Twitch profile, and it'll be added onto this video, to the replay of this video after it's done too. So you can find the links there. And yeah, please follow again if you're interested. I'd love to have you on the show. I'd love for you to contribute in the chat. I'd love for this to kind of be more interactive going forward. So again, yeah, the more the merrier. So yeah, in light of that, let's get rolling here. So looking at Bitcoin first on the weekly time frame from a cyclical standpoint, and these numbers I have on the charts represent the peaks and valleys of each sort of 60-day cycle that Bitcoin goes in. I wanted to kind of point this out. First of all, we're on day 36 of the current cycle, if we look at it. And this is interesting to me for a couple different reasons. Let's go back to the weekly here. So usually by day 36 in an uptrend, we would start to see an additional kind of run up at this point, and we're not now. And so currently, I think we peaked. So far, the cycle peak is actually already happened. Let's look at what this is. We had our cycle peak on day 28. So if that ends up holding as the cycle high, that's not a great look. It could just be that it goes sideways though too. Sometimes cycles don't necessarily have to have big peaks and valleys. They can just go sideways. And in that case, it carries a lot less weight if the cycle peaks sort of around the middle or just before or just after the middle. And I feel like with everything that's going on with the ETFs, we're sort of just kind of in limbo right now. We're in a bit of a holding pattern. And so I'm not entirely surprised to see this. We can see that it's pretty much just, hovered around the same level the entire time. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see a bit of a run up though, really just because I come back to, if I look at this indicator all the way down here, this DS indicator, this is indicating that we're sort of in a new weekly cycle, and we're really at the very beginning of it. And so it's not really common to start a new weekly cycle in this kind of scenario and to have, a big breakdown at that point, given the overall trend that we're in. So I wouldn't be surprised to see everything kind of pump a little bit. Actually, I wanted to point out a couple things here. So I've got a couple different support and resistance levels to look at. This first one, the support level, is basically based on these two candles right here that we had a peak up above that. It immediately broke back down. But this is sort of looking like the current support level. And we haven't actually come down and touched it yet. It's right about 29,250. And I'm looking at that as kind of the breakdown level. Like if we get much below that, we're going to be looking at sort of a structural change. But right now, I mean, otherwise things do look good. We're holding above the 10-week moving average, which, I mean, again, is strong in any uptrend. That's what you want to see. And technically I know we've been sideways for the last, almost or month, but structurally we're still in an uptrend. I mean, we did set a new high, a new yearly high just last week. We're staying above the 10-week moving average. We're basically bouncing off the top of the Bollinger Band. And so yeah, it's not great. It does look kind of ugly, but structurally we are still in an uptrend. So that's kind of what matters. I've got a couple other lines here that I think are relevant to me that I've drawn out, and it's this upward trend that that we've managed to hold so far. I'm not the hugest fan of diagonal trend lines. I tend to give a lot more weight to horizontal support resistance levels, but until this line breaks, I'm going to kind of keep it on my chart and look at it because we're still holding to that trajectory, and I think that's interesting. So that's something I'm looking at there. Also on the resistance side, on the top side, I've noted this level here, and that basically is derived from the monthly candle bodies here. I think I may have pointed that out last week too, but I'm looking at that as a pretty big resistance level going forward. Um, I did want to point out a couple things, or actually real quick. So one thing I pointed out last week was this divergence flag, this big 5-spot divergence flag on the weekly that looked super ominous because we rarely get those, as you can see. Um, but so far, I think that that has kind of not been invalidated, but just been, I don't know, I don't want to call it a false alarm. I mean, they are what they are. It's not predicting anything. It's not telling me what's going to happen. It's just identifying divergences. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to kind of melt down from there. Um, Another thing I thought that was interesting as I was looking at this was the Bollinger Bands on the weekly time frame have gotten actually pretty constricted. And if you look down here, so this indicator here with this big kind of green line, this is basically just a line indicator of the spread between the top and the bottom. And so the higher the line goes up, the bigger the spread. As you can see, it corresponds exactly with what we're seeing with the band here and the band here. And if you'll notice, the band is actually as constricted as it's been in a long time. In fact, going back all the way back to 2018, to the end of 2018 was the last time they were constricted this much on the weekly level. So that's interesting to me. That means that the volatility has very much slowed, and we can sort of see that here graphically represented on this Bitcoin volatility index chart too. Volatility is pretty much just leveled off. We're not getting these wild swings that we would get throughout time in these various cycles. It's really just sort of gone sideways. That's not necessarily good or bad. It just it just sort of is what it is. I mean, it just means that there's lots of buyers and sellers. I think they're holding this level pretty steadily. I think there's definitely a bid at this 30,000 level, but also you could argue that perhaps a lot of people that maybe bought back here that were underwater for this whole amount of time, finally got back to break even and are looking to kind of get their money back. And so that's a scenario for some of the sellers. And I think probably what we're seeing right now with this sideways price action is a lot of money going from short-term sellers and retail sellers back into whale accumulation and things like that. I think the smart money is buying at this level and picking it up for the future, for the ride up. But yeah, I think it's going to be sideways for a little bit longer. And I noted, you'll see here, I noted a couple of lines, and these are rough estimates based on the best calculations I could do based on the filing reports that I read. But roughly around the 1st of September will be an announcement regarding the ETF approvals. Whether they decide to postpone it for another 45 days remains to be seen. But the first potential approval could fall right around, the last bit of August, first week of September, right in there. And then if they postpone them, that would bump it out another 45 days to roughly the middle of October. So these two lines could potentially be, major catalysts, obviously. And so I'm not going to be at all surprised if kind of everybody's just waiting on that and Bitcoin goes sideways for another, month, a month and a half even, and or just maybe rides this up a little bit. Who knows? I don't expect to see a ton of price action. I'd like to see a little bump up, maybe again to the top of these Bollinger Bands, possibly even up to this resistance level. I figured that we would get something at least up to this point by now, but maybe not. But given the fact that again we're still in the beginnings of a new weekly cycle, and things generally do look relatively healthy, so nothing is doom and gloom here. It's more just kind of boring. And then if we look at it on the daily, let's get rid of that stuff for now. Yeah, it's a bit more of the same. Not a great look. Again, we're there's a lot more touching of support, I guess, than there is of pushing out. I mean, yes, we did have the one breakout last week. Yes, we did set a new yearly high last week, but it was immediately rejected and immediately right back down into the range. And we've pretty much just been sort of hugging these support lines. We're going sideways even so much to the extent that both the 10 and the 20-day are pretty much just right on top of each other. There's not even really a divergence hardly at all from them, except over the last few days. So yeah, this just sort of speaks more to the boring price action. I think if we start to dip below this red line here, the support level, or if we start to dip below this trend line, I'll be a little concerned. But I'm not going to really want to get to the point where I want to maybe lower my positions or lessen my positions unless we start to get back down into these ranges here, into the 24, 25 range. Or come down and hit this, is it 100-day? I think 100-day moving average, 200-day moving average. So yeah, if we get down here, that's not a great look. That's actually pretty ugly given the timing of where we are in the cycle. So I'm hoping we don't see that. But again, I'm really just expecting sideways sort of up in this range all the way to here. I think if they do kick the can on the first ETF opportunity, that'll be a bit of a bearish sentiment look. But I think, the general consensus is that that's probably, there's at least a 50-50 chance that's going to happen, if not greater. I don't think anybody's necessarily expecting this to go through on the first try. And so I'd like to see that, price hold in that event, but I guess that remains to be seen. So that's kind of what's going on with Bitcoin. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, Bollinger Band's tight on the daily level too. Just kind of in limbo, seeing lots of divergence flags on both sides of the coin, kind of not really signaling much. It's holding steady. So yeah, boring, even, just whatever, just kind of twiddle our thumbs and wait it out a little bit longer. But structurally, again, everything is still going good. We're still setting higher highs and higher lows. Bullish structure still intact. So yeah, boring. Let's take a look at ETH. ETH is obviously pretty much the same. Structurally, like if we look at it here on the monthly or on the weekly rather, real quick, very similar to Bitcoin. It's kind of holding at sort of some major resistance levels, some major psychological levels. Bitcoin's at the 30,000 level. ETH is holding it around the 2,000 level, give or take. And that's right about where these lines are too. And so, but structurally, it looks very similar to Bitcoin. We've had clusters here, we had a cluster here, a cluster here, and that's proving to be the big resistance level. So same exact deal, same exact structure. It also looks good on the weekly. Everything is, the 10 is above the 20 still. Price is above both of them. It's not exactly bouncing off the top of the band, although it is a little bit right here. But overall, in general, I think it looks pretty good. But at the moment, the narrative is being driven by Bitcoin, and so nothing else is really going to do much until Bitcoin gets sorted out. Even though ETH again does have its own narrative with its staking, I think that's not going to pick up until later in the year or really early next year, where that starts to be a thing that really drives the price up. So it's just going to kind of basically follow what Bitcoin does. And then if we look at like the Bitcoin ETH chart, I touched on this last week too. Let's look at this on the weekly. I was wondering if it was going to come down and poke below this channel. So far, it's bounced off of it, which I guess I was pleasantly surprised. It's nice to see ETH showing a little bit of strength here and kind of holding steady with that. I still am not going to be surprised though if it does lose this support level and kind of come down, back into this cluster again here. But I'll take it. I'll take it for now. But clearly, we can see certainly on the weekly that Bitcoin has been outpacing ETH for a number of months, and really, I think, like I said, is going to continue to. And so I'm mostly positioned in Bitcoin right now because ETH, even though ETH is a different story than all the other alts, it's still not going to outperform Bitcoin, I think, at the moment. And so I'm really not going to look to rotate into ETH or any other alts until we start seeing the price start closing back above the middle of these bands and start seeing a trend reversal where the 10-week gets back above the 20-week, and we start to see things going in the opposite direction. But for now, ETH is in a downtrend, so I'm staying out of ETH. Yeah, just kind of Bitcoin is the thing. I mean, there's a few other exceptions out there. There's a few alts that are showing some strength. I'm going to touch on a handful of them here. I'm sure I'm going to miss some. There's lots out there that will spike, but I think that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind. Like, let's look at OP. I know OP's been doing good. Optimism has had a great couple of weeks, and I've heard people say, "Ooh, yeah, now's the time to get into this," and you got to kind of take a step back and remember, first of all, I think that's a little bit short-sighted. You can't jump on something because it has 2 good weeks in a row. I know later on in a bull market, an alt can have 2 good weeks in a row and go up, 10x. But right now, that's not so much a thing, unless we're talking about Pepe or some kind of meme coin like that. But I mean, if you kind of go back and look at optimism, yeah, it had a great breakout at the beginning of the year. Did way better than Bitcoin early on in the first couple of months, but then ever since then, since really the end of February, it's just been bleeding out, bleeding out, bleeding out against Bitcoin, and now it's actually priced lower than its initial price of Bitcoin price at the beginning of the year. So it's down on the year against Bitcoin. So if you bought um, optimism at the beginning of the year, thinking it would be a better play against Bitcoin, you basically be just under break even on that play. Yeah, you would have been up, but then you would have been way down. Now you're under break even. Now you've lost money. So basically, if you'd have just been in Bitcoin this whole time, you'd actually be a little bit ahead right now of that. And then I think more importantly, if you look at this, yeah, it's had 2 good weeks in a row, but also it's still barely just kind of coming back to the 10-week moving average against Bitcoin. It's not even back. It hasn't even mean reverted back to the center of the bands yet. Let alone really kind of dug its feet into a proper trend reversal. So this kind of really isn't anything to me yet. And so I feel like it's still very premature to dive into a bunch of alts and think that, it's alt season just because something has a few good weeks. So kind of keep that in mind. Keep in mind where we are in the cycle. Keep in mind that we're at the beginning of the cycle. We're still in very much an accumulation phase. If you've been following Bitcoin for over the years, it doesn't really work that way. It kind of goes in sort of distinct rotations where Bitcoin leads the pack, it goes way up, and then as people start to take profits from Bitcoin going way up, they spread it basically further and further out the risk curve, initially into ETH and then into other alts, and that's where you see these huge alt runs, and those are great, and there will be a time to jump on that. But now's not it. Now we're still barely in the first year of the cycle. We're not even to the halving yet. Um, Bitcoin is going to kind of lead the way for at least the rest of the year and probably a good chunk into next year too. Again, there will be exceptions to that. There's always going to be some random alt that pumps for some speculative, stupid reason. But in a general sense, that's playing the lottery. And if you want to get into crypto and hold responsible positions, you kind of need to be cognizant of the cycles and the rotations and how that works, from a larger perspective. So I did want to kind of poke through a few different other alts and take a look and sort of identify similar patterns. If we look at Litecoin here, a lot of people are talking about the Litecoin halving coming up. Here's the Actually, let me back up. I'm really only going to highlight or focus on what these altcoins are doing against Bitcoin, because I think it's important to point out that everybody's like, "Ooh, Litecoin's doing good, Optimism's doing good, Arbitrum's doing good." Yeah, maybe up in USD value, but like they're losing money against Bitcoin. And if these alts that you're holding aren't outpacing the sort of class benchmark, the asset class benchmark that is Bitcoin, then you're actually not doing good. You're making USD money, but if you'd have just sat in Big Daddy Boomer Bitcoin that you think is not worth holding, you'd actually be a lot better off. And here's a perfect example of that. Here's Litecoin from the beginning of the year, well down against Bitcoin. It doesn't really matter what it's doing in USD value. You're well down against Bitcoin since January. So yeah, let's take a look. Bitcoin Cash is kind of funny. So Bitcoin Cash had this pump because it got listed listed on, it was sort of deemed not a security and listed on this exchange that was supported by TradFi institutions. And so it had this big mega pump. And I was kind of goofing on it like, oh, great. Now am I going to have to pay attention to Bitcoin Cash? Because like all these boomer TradFi people are, you know, like I joke, they're calling up their brokers, saying, buy me, 7,000 shares of Bitcoin Cash or whatever it is, or however that works. And so we had this big stupid pump. Um, and then I'm just expecting it to bleed out. And if really, it's another thing. If you look at it, like if we kind of go back and look at this in Bitcoin Cash's history, it's done this a number of times where it'll hit a hard low and it'll pump up a good bit. It'll do a 2 or 3x and then it'll come down and it'll have another pump and it'll come way down, have another big pump. And so now I'm thinking this is just what we're seeing here. I won't be at all surprised if this is just going to be another big pump and a full retrace back down and lower lows, just like it's sort of done throughout its history. Because I mean, again, Bitcoin Cash isn't anything. It's basically a ghost chain. It's not even a meme. It's not even anything. So I think people that were hoping to maybe capitalize on the notion of sort of ignorant TradFi buyers coming in and loading up on Bitcoin Cash and being able to play that, it's looking less and less likely at this point. It's looking like that was our run up, and that's going to be the end of that. And so, yes, technically, Bitcoin Cash is up on Bitcoin since the beginning of the year due to this sort of artificial pump, but I think it'll be short lived. Honestly, this is probably a better short play than it is a long play at the moment, if that's your thing. But I'm just not expecting much at all from this. So I did want to point that out. Another one that's interesting is Binance, BNB. Let me get rid of these here. Come on. So over its history, BNB has actually held really well against Bitcoin. In fact, it's one of maybe even the only one in its entire history that's gone on to set new all-time highs against Bitcoin in successive 4-year cycles. I don't think Bit or ETH hasn't even done that. It set its high in 2019. We had the bear market, came up again, set a new high in 2020, a new all-time high against Bitcoin, and then has gone on to since set yet another all-time high against Bitcoin. And I just don't know if anything has done that. But right now it's looking actually really ugly. And there's a lot of smoke around Bitcoin or around BNB. I'm not going to get into the details of that because who knows what's true and what isn't, and I certainly don't. But yeah, BNB not looking good, well down against Bitcoin on the year at this point. So not a good long-term hold, I think, right now. Not something you want to load up on. Just doesn't have a good look. Solana, on the other hand, is interesting. I'm actually a little bit surprised at Solana, personally. I was expecting Solana to keep bleeding out, but it's as a lot of people have said, it's got a lot going on. It's got a lot of development. It still has a long ways to go in terms of um, you know just market share and getting users onto the platform and getting users to use it. Yes, it's got a lot of NFTs. Yes, it's got a few DeFi protocols and things, but the total value locked is still just a teeny tiny fraction of all the other blockchains. And so I'm not down. I'm not against any project. I hope every project succeeds, but I just didn't. I didn't have a lot of faith in this project, and so I was a little bit surprised. Um, let's see. Hey, we got a chatter. I was a little bit surprised to see Solana do as well as it did. And initially, I looked at it. Um, it had a big pump, and just like I said. Hold on, let's see. I got a few different people chatting me here. Okay. Um, it had a pump, but just like I was saying about, don't get too excited about something having a couple of good weeks against Bitcoin. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. And this one actually has continued to push a little bit further. This one's actually gotten all the way up to the top of the bands on the weekly, which is a good sign. Hey Lee, thanks for jumping on here. Good to see you. Um, and so yeah, it pumped a little bit. I am expecting it to kind of level off. But this one is definitely on my radar. And I think it is a healthy thing to see that, yes, it did pump against Bitcoin again in the beginning of the year, like a lot of alts did, and has bled out like many alts have. But it bounced at basically right around the same price that it did, that it started at the beginning of the year and has since continued to go up. Um, and so I think that's a good sign. It's constructive to say the least, and I'm gonna sort of keep an eye on it. I'm not ready to get into a position of it yet. I'd like to see it, hold this higher high level up here, or break this level up here actually from this guy, the top of this candle right there. I think if it can set a new higher high and sort of close above that against Bitcoin, then that'll be something worth paying attention to. I think by that point we'll see the 10-week moving average pump up against or cross over against the 20, and as long as we can see that happen and we can see price continue to stay in the upper half of the bands, and start setting higher highs and sort of change this long-term downward bearish structure, which really still hasn't technically broken. It's still technically a bearish structure. If that structure can break, then that will have my attention. And I do want to kind of take a look at this one on the USD pair also, because there's a little bit of interesting stuff here too. Oops. So I know I pointed out last week, it's got this big channel that's really been sort of in place for going back a few years now, and I was expecting it to break into this channel and then see if it held support there, and so far it has. I'm a little surprised at that too. I did expect it to kind of come back down out of there because I felt like it was a little bit overheated. It was kind of cooked, um, but it's held so far. It's held support. It's it, you know right, hovering right around the 10-day moving average on the USD pair. So again, constructive. This is good to see. I mean, it looks good on the daily, but again, if you look at it on the weekly, it's not it's not massive. It's not, because of where we are in the early stage of the cycle. Like I've been saying, you want to be wary of this. You're going to see alts do this. You're going to see alts run up for even 2 or 3 4 weeks like this. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's quote alt season and it's time to go all in. So keep an eye on this, but again, it's early. It's early. Let's look at a few others. We got Stacks here. So Stacks is an interesting one. Stacks is a alt project that is basically it's like a smart contract protocol that runs on top of the Bitcoin blockchain, which is interesting. And there's actually 3 different projects that do that, but Stacks is the only one that has a coin associated with it. The others don't. And as we can see here, I've made notes of these on where they were at the open of the year against Bitcoin. And Stacks actually had an amazing first quarter. And it was riding on the wave of all the ordinal craze that came out at the beginning of the year. It really was heavily influenced by that, and it did very well against Bitcoin. But it has since bled out. Granted, it's still well up against Bitcoin on the year, and I think that's noteworthy, and I think that's something to kind of pay attention to. Yes, the structure has changed. Yes, on a weekly time frame, it has basically shifted into a bearish structure, and a bearish trend, but you're still well up on Bitcoin by actually, what are we at? It seems like a fair, decent margin here. Yeah, 65%, give or take, on the year against Bitcoin. So that's not small change there. That's something to kind of keep in mind. Will it keep bleeding out? I don't know. Really what it's waiting for, I think that's going to be the next big catalyst with Stacks, is later in the year. I don't know exactly when, probably sometime in Q4 if I had to guess, maybe even early next year. There's going to be an upgrade to the Bitcoin network that will allow uh, basically Stacks to operate to its full potential. It will allow smart contracts to be in effect and in operation on Bitcoin. And I think that's going to be a big catalyst for Stacks. Where it'll go between now and then, I don't know. There's every chance that it could totally bleed back out to its sort of break even level with Bitcoin on the year. I think if you bought in this early and you rode this pump up, probably this is something you'll want to hold on to, which I think is a rare exception. If you didn't, if you missed this pump, um, I don't know that it's going to do you much good to hop into this right now. I mean, obviously you would have missed the 65% gain, and there's every chance that, like I said, it could bleed out over the coming next 2, 3, or 4 months until that upgrade happens. So, maybe kind of keep an eye on the news, wait for that to come along before you look to jump into this. I think you kind of missed the boat at this point, for the time being, at least with stacks. Let's look at a few others here. Lido, however you say it. That's another really popular one that has done very well, and I think will continue to do well. I think it's sort of on my short list for something I might look to hold on to, for a longer term hold, later, once altcoin season rolls around. But for the time being, kind of a similar pattern that we're seeing across a lot of these now, if you'll notice. Big spike at the beginning of the year. It's like we had a mini alt season, in the first quarter, through March, and then everything has sort of just died since then. We're still technically slightly above break even from the yearly entry on Bitcoin. Um, I don't know. I kind of my sentiment there too is sort of the same as with stacks. I think, if you were in it, go ahead and hold on to it. But if you missed the boat, now is probably not the time. Now, there's every chance it could actually dip lower than this and bleed out a little bit more. Lito's going to be heavily driven by the ETH narrative, as we know. And so, I think it's got a little bit of a ways to go until it sees any kind of major catalyst again. Not that it won't, but just, I think we're in a bit of a lull here with that. So, um, yeah, what else do we got here? Arbitrum, well, we'll look at a couple of these layer twos. Arbitrum hasn't been around very long, so it's really hard to gauge it against Bitcoin. But I mean, even against USD, it's pretty much just gone sideways. You can see. Um, Actually, let's look at this on the daily. Um, Literally just sideways. That's about the most boring chart you can have, really. So like, and it's funny with the with these layer two coins. I don't get it. I mean, they're both, in the case of Arbitrum and Optimism, they're both just governance tokens. They don't actually have a function. They don't accrue value to the token. You don't use them for gas like you do with Ethereum or some of the other alt layer ones. Um, they really should have no investment value, basically. And to a degree here, Arbitrum doesn't seem to, at least as of yet. Optimism, on the other hand, it's been around a little bit longer. Um, but the same thing applies. I mean, honestly, it's also just a governance token. It's a little more volatile, and it had a big pump at the beginning of the year, just like, everything else we've looked at so far. But now it's actually down on the year, as we touched on a second ago. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know with these. Uh, Speculation is going to drive the price of these tokens. And if people want to buy them, and drive the price way up, sure, I'll ride that wave. It makes no sense, but I'll take their money, I guess. um, but I'm not big on these. I mean, I love the projects. I love what they do. I love the layer twos. I think layer twos are absolutely important in the crypto ecosystem and the Ethereum ecosystem, especially until ETH is sort of fully developed out. But, in terms of like, an investment, yeah, these make no sense. I'll still use Optimism and Arbitrum, absolutely, to transact on, but I don't get the appeal from an investment standpoint at all, at all. And then a couple more here. Aptos, another alt layer one that sort of came out, and bursted onto the scene, did a big pump up again at the beginning of the year, just like everything else, and has continued to bleed out. Um, with these alt layer ones, I think we're still just so early. This one could have some appeal because it's new to this cycle, which, gives it an advantage. It's still sort of considered to be, the new shiny object, and so it still probably will have a big speculative pump. Whether it gets mass adoption or any kind of measurable adoption obviously remains to be seen. And I don't really get into the tech of any of these, because everyone's like, oh, well, it does this and it does that, and it's so fast and it can do a bajillion transactions a second and it's so cheap, and you can do all these different high functioning smart contracts and blah blah blah, and all that's great, good, awesome. We need that, but like, none of that matters really in the end. All that matters is that developers develop on it and products get built on it and people use them, because that's what's going to make these projects long-term viable and worth investing in. And so as much as that sucks, in a lot of ways it comes down to like who's got the best marketing team, and whose code is the easiest to develop with, and things like that. And I hope like AI makes some of that coding easier, and maybe makes some of that adoption easier from a developer standpoint for all of these new layer ones. But you know, market share is a big thing, and that's really hard to crack. And there's a ton of layer ones out there that are better than Ethereum objectively in many ways. But that doesn't, as we know, as we see, that doesn't mean anything to a large degree. And so I don't know. I don't know what this. Yes, it's still better than Bitcoin. Yes, if you'd have bought this at the beginning of the year, you'd be better off than if you just bought Bitcoin. But um, it's like with these, with Aptos, with all these other ones. There's another one, Celestia, that's coming out. It's just a wait and see for me on all of these. If people want to speculate on them and drive the price up crazy like they did with Solana and a bunch of the layer ones that came out last cycle, I'm happy to ride that wave. I'm happy to throw some money at it and make some money off of it. But none of that really means anything. I think we'll get the big speculative pump across the board with all of these, and then once the dust settles, we'll sort of really see who's left standing, and who's got the market share, and what the real valuations are of these projects. But for the moment, it's just way too early to tell on any of these. I got a couple more here I want to touch on. Quant's an interesting one. Quant is actually one that I did very well with in the previous cycle. In fact, it was maybe my best overall investment in terms of percentage gains, but it's way down on the year against Bitcoin right now. And I'm glad I got out of it, way back when I did, because it's just honestly not looking good at all. I think Quant has a future, but it's an interesting project on its own, and it will be highly dependent on sort of how the TradFi space evolves and decides to interact with blockchains. And yet that's still kind of floating out there and remains to be seen. Quant's interesting too. It doesn't really operate or sort of flow with the rest of the market. It often tends to go in the opposite direction, and then when you least expect it, it will do these crazy pumps out of nowhere and go up, 5x, and it doesn't make any sense. It almost operates more like a meme token, because it doesn't have, it's a blockchain project that doesn't actually operate on a blockchain. It operates through APIs and basically connects banking institutions and financial institutions to various blockchains, and provides sort of interoperability to these various blockchains via programming APIs. So it's unique in a way. It's cool, and again, I think there's a place for it, but um, from an investment standpoint, stay away from it for right now. The last few I want to touch on are um, derivative dexes, because I think that that's going to be still a strong sector going forward. But as we can see here, I think we're recognizing a pattern here as we look at all of these. Yeah, huge pump at the beginning of the year, way down on the year now against Bitcoin. GMX is one, DYDX is another one. DYDX is holding up a little bit better. It's been around a bit longer. It's got a slightly better structure. It's actually technically ever so slightly up against Bitcoin on the year, but basically sideways. Either way, I think it's premature on both of these. I think these aren't really going to take off until the regulatory space, I think in the US, sort of works itself out a little bit more, and we need just more adoption. We need more usage of these platforms. We need more liquidity. We need more volume, and that's what's going to help these. I definitely think that we need this. We need derivatives, decentralized derivatives. I think there's a huge market for that product, but yeah, it's kind of too early. It's too early for both of these. Even though I think they'll do well. This doesn't scare me. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to buy this right now, but I think GMX is a good project. I think DYDX is a good project too, and there's a handful of other ones too. But it's just, again, right now, all of this, again, to sort of just reiterate, the focus needs to be on Bitcoin at the moment. That's where the money's at, and anything that's outpacing Bitcoin, at least in this little small sampling, is either bleeding out and back at break even, or had a false pump, or whatever. Nothing is really like showing major strength. I'm sure there's projects out there that I'm not aware of that maybe are, although I feel like I would have heard of them because I'm pretty much in this all day every day. But if anything, honestly, going back to Solana, that's really the only one that has got my attention, at least. And even that, it's still sort of premature. We're sort of kind of right in the middle of this range here. We're not even in the middle of this range here. So again, that's still a wait and see, but it's constructive, and that's more than a lot of these other alt projects can say. So yeah, on that note, I think I'm going to end it here. I feel like this was a good run through. So yeah, if you enjoyed this, please follow my channel. Please, comment. Please, follow my Telegram to get alerts of upcoming shows. I'm going to be on a Real Vision show through the Pro Crypto subscription coming up. I think next week, next Friday, I want to say. So that's fun. And yeah, otherwise, have a good weekend, everybody. And I'll probably do another stream on Monday. And if not Monday, then for sure Wednesday. And we'll go from there. So thanks for watching, and have a good weekend, everybody. See you later.